on in here.
I was up there on the 7th.
Okay, great. Well, let's get started. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brisbane City Council special meeting. We're having a study session this evening, and that is regarding the Brisbane Baylands planning application, Baylands concept plans, Brisbane Baylands specific plan, case SP-01-06, general plan amendment cases GP-01-06, GP-01-10, and related final environmental impact report. Specific topics this evening include water supply, public services and facilities, and related policy issues. Universal Paragon Corporation applicant. Okay, so this study session is, as we know, open to the public, but the primary purpose of this is for the City Council to be able to ask questions that are on the agenda. And the public comment is encouraged at the 7:30 p.m. hearing following this study session. So because we have several topics on the agenda tonight, and I want to make sure we have a chance to cover them all, I'm going to have staff give a report, and then we'll go topic by topic so that we hone in on the specific issues and allow council members to ask questions by topic before we move on to the next topic. Okay, so staff report, please.
Oh, well, Madam Mayor, what we did last time, just to facilitate your time is kind of limited. We weren't planning on doing the full staff report now. We can just jump into questions.
Sure,
or,
that works too.
That might be a little more efficient use of your time.
Okay, so let's start with water supply. Who would like to go first?
Well, nobody's jumping at it, so okay, John. You know, first thing that I'd like to hear about is this afternoon we received a letter from MID, Modesto Irrigation District, saying that their concerns were not addressed in the final EIR, and I'd like to hear somewhat of a dissertation on how it was or wasn't, and because in their eyes it wasn't addressed, so, and what the impact of that is.
Okay. There's a couple different things to keep in mind. One is that I think in the original letter there was a concern expressed by MID that they never received the documents, and we tracked down that they had actually been received. They never got from the front to wherever they needed to go. They were actually on somebody's desk who was no longer at the district. So
within their department.
Within the district. So we did track that down. The issues that they have are in the transfer of water from Oakdale Irrigation District. That's the place the physical supply actually moves, and how that would occur and the quality of water they would receive compared to the quality of water of the receiving reservoir. All of those issues related to water quality are part of dealing with the actual mechanics of how water will be moved, which will be part of the implementation and part of actually doing a water supply agreement. So right now what the city has is a term sheet signed with Oakdale Irrigation District that lays out the basic framework for later negotiation of an agreement, because you are in that term sheet entitled to negotiate up to 2,400 acre feet per year, but what isn't in that agreement is how physically that water moves. It's not every day, 365 days a year, an equal amount of water moves. And so part of the whole discussion of doing an agreement that would be required between you and Oakdale Irrigation District, and an agreement between Oakdale and Modesto Irrigation Districts, between Modesto and San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and then SFPUC to the city would be all the agreements that are necessary. And the basic process that's discussed in the EIR, and that is part of the final EIR and also laid out in your staff report, is right now we have a programmatic analysis of what would happen by taking the water out of the Stanislaus River and how that would affect the quality of water that then gets moved from OID, Oakdale, to MID is dependent on how much physically gets moved in any one day in any one period of time compared to how much water is actually in the receiving reservoir. Because if the quality is different, how does it mix? That all would be addressed as part of the actual design of a system and an agreement to move. So the issue that MID has raised is a very similar to one to what the SFPUC raised as part of the EIR, which is the mechanics of that water movement needs to be addressed as part of the implementation. And so there is a process for doing that, and a requirement in this EIR to do a project-specific EIR once the actual mechanics of how physically that water moves are known.
So I was going to save this for, sorry, can I have one? I was going to save this for the regular meeting, but we don't want to have this discussion twice, I guess. So I actually received a call from Anna Brathwaite in November. She's the attorney for MID. She called me pretty upset. They still seem to be, I just spoke with her via email. They seem to feel very left out, as you can tell from the letter that was received in 2013, and the sentiment still seems to be the same. So I asked, when we talked, I said, well, I think it would be appropriate if you reached out to us when we're discussing this topic, because the council should have this information when it's relevant to what we're talking about at the moment. So she said that they would send something else and they might send a representative. Well, we received, I think, kind of the same document that we received in 2013. So to my knowledge, from speaking with her, it seems like they're still feel out of the loop, and I'm just wondering, how do you approve a project when it's unclear if the water supply can be supplied. I mean, I know that there's a term sheet with OID, but if MID doesn't want to cooperate, or it feels, for lack of a better word, a little shaded by us, what do you do? I feel like it's hard to make a decision on a project if it's unclear whether water is going to be coming or not, when a key player doesn't seem like they're going to participate.
So let's lay out the three levels that are dealt with in water versus planning and CEQA. At the general plan level, at the most general, the question that you look at, that's looked at there is there a water supply reasonably available somewhere? Because next to no general plan that I've ever seen does a water supply assessment and says water supply for the build out of our general plan is going to come from that supply. And one of the reasons for that is most general plans and most build out is 20 years or longer, and water districts plan for 20 years, you build out over 30,
right,
and you just don't get there. And at a general plan level, that's really kind of premature to start taking buying water supply for build out of a general plan. So very similar to the way that you approached in this community the 1994 general plan. At the general plan level, the amendment that's being requested by UPC, the Planning Commission's recommendation, is there a water supply out there somewhere is the question. When you get to the specific plan, which UPC has proposed, then the water question is very different. And the water question at that point goes from general plan, is there a water supply available somewhere, to is there a water supply that is assured that can be made available in normal year, dry year, multiple dry years, that we can actually acquire.
So I guess what I'm trying to figure out, if that's the way that it works, presumably MID has been down this road before, right, with other projects. Why, if it was just a simple misunderstanding and they didn't get the documents, would they still have the same sentiment now? I just don't understand why they would be feeling this way if this is how it's supposed to work.
I can't, and I can't answer for how they feel or why they feel that way.
I'm trying to figure it out.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Some of the issues that, or in fact, the issues, most of them that MID needs to deal with in terms of that physical transfer of water and how does it work within their system, how much water would they be storing at any point in time, how much would they have to release to SFPUC compared to how much they have in, and all of the mechanics of that are not anything that can be done, analyzed right now, because there's a whole engineering water system that has to be designed, and there's one major question that we don't know the answer to, and that is water being supplied for the developer-sponsored plan, which would require about 2,000 acre-feet of water per year, or for something very less than that. If we're looking at something similar to the renewable energy alternative or the Planning Commission recommendation, we're looking at a quarter of that water supply. And how 2,400 acre-feet, 2,000 for the Baylands and 400 for the city, would move through the MID system and OID system and SFPUC system is very different than how 900 acre-feet would move through. So the first step in this process is how much water, what's the land use that water is being provided for? So that general plan question, how much land use do we have that we need water for? Then in the water decision making and design, and this is where we move from John's planning world to Randy's engineering design world, is how do we move 900 acre-feet, 2,400 acre-feet, whatever it is, and that's a series of negotiations that takes place over a long period of time because there's a lot of issues involved. Water would move differently in a wet year than it would move in a normal year, than it's going to move in a dry year, than it's going to move in a drought, even if it's the same amount. And how is it stored? Where is it stored? Who moves what from where? And so that is the basic process. Where it gets to the question you're asking about what can we approve or why are we approving, At the general plan level, the issue of is MID on board and where are we in negotiations is really not critical, because you are setting your land use policy at that level. When you consider the Commission's recommendation on the specific plan, that is where you need to ask the question, if we are going as a community to consider approval of a specific plan, is there water? Does that water supply assessment address a supply that can actually be purchased? And so, the concern that you have about how will MID react, can we do that, will it work, is a specific plan question. If you don't feel comfortable with the answers that we can give at this level of planning, then you don't have the basis for approving a water supply agreement or the specific plan, which is the Planning Commission's recommendation at this point is don't approve the specific plan, get the general plan in place, and in terms of water, then figure out a little bit more about how water moves, get OID, MID, and SFPUC on board at a greater level of detail than we can do right now without an understanding of how much water we're moving, then come back with a specific plan. That's the Commission's recommendation that's in front of you.
Okay.
And just one quick procedural point is, I appreciate they reached out to you in November. We responded to their letter when we published the final EIR, which would have been when, Lloyd? When did we publish?
June of last year.
Last year or the year before?
Year before.
So in all that time, MID had our response.
Yeah.
They never reached out to anyone in city staff to have
I have no idea why they picked me, so it's like,
It's hard to understand. We wrote a response. We had assumed if they were not comfortable with the response, we would hear from them and have some further interaction, but that didn't.
I guess we have to re-respond to their re-response. So.
they just sent it again, so that's why I feel like maybe they feel the same. I don't know. There's some miscommunication happening somewhere. I'm just kind of caught in the middle, but I was trying to sift through it, so, okay.
If I may, has MID responded this way to similar developments throughout California, or just this one that you know of?
We don't know.
Okay. All right.
Are there any other questions on the water transfer
Yes,
issue?
I do. So I guess just to respond to what you said thus far regarding to Madison's follow-up, if we do it that way, obviously it's going to take a really long time again, right? It's going to go full circle, right? If we do it that mechanically. But if we do it the other way where we approve or disapprove something, I mean, if we approve something, then it has to go back to the general plan, and if a agreement can't be consummated, then a specific plan lays idle until you find water, right? Is that how that works?
I'll state a little bit differently. To approve the specific plan, because a water supply assessment is required with a specific plan, you would need to approve a water supply assessment along with the specific plan. And so if you looked at that water supply assessment and said, yeah, there's a supply that's been identified, you show it's adequate, but we don't believe realistically it could be acquired, then you could not approve the water supply assessment and could not approve the specific plan.
But what if we did believe that it could be acquired and it doesn't transpire?
Okay, that gets to the third level.
Okay.
Okay, so the third level is now you have a water supply assessment approved, a specific plan approved based on a water supply. If that water supply agreement never comes to fruition, you can't approve a site-specific development project, because at the site-specific development project level, the question is there an adequate supply physically in place?
Right.
And in the absence, not only of that agreement, of the set of agreements, but of whatever needs to be done to physically move that water, you can't make the finding at the project level, site-specific project level, that the water supply is actually sitting in an SFPUC reservoir available for delivery to Brisbane.
Okay. Now, this would probably be asked, I'm sure during the public hearing. Do we have a target on placement of a water tank? And this is probably to you, Randy.
Yes, sir, we do. It'd be up at a higher elevation on Guadalupe Canyon Parkway.
Okay, yeah. At about what?
I don't recall the top working water level off the top of my head, sir.
Is there plans to tie it into the current system the way Guadalupe currently is tied into central Brisbane? Is there plans to?
Yes, it would. Yeah,
it would all tie together.
Right.
Now, I know on at least one of the plans that there's what's termed a scalping plant, right? Scalping. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Randy. A scalping plant, and that would be placed at a lower elevation, or what?
That's related to the water recycling facility.
I thought it's recycled water. It's not the potable water, right? Okay. So I'm sorry. I was consulting here because I'm getting a little confused. That's related more towards the recycled water that would be taking the sewage and converting
recycled water,
converting it to water that primarily is right now is intended to be used for irrigation.
Yeah, it's reuse. And so, could you maybe explain a little bit? I know you've done this before, but it's always good to
Sure.
go over it again. How that works? How's the scalping plant work? What it does?
So what the scalping plant does is there are 3 types of treatment that you could do to sewage. They're pretty easy: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Most of the plants that are out here, they're all required, of course, to do primary, which is just where you're taking out the solids. The secondary type treatment that happens usually there's some sort of biological filtration where you have a mix of bioorganisms that are in there that break down the chemicals and such that are in the sewage. Tertiary is a disinfectant system that happens to it. So to do recycled water to be used for irrigation, you would have to have a tertiary system. And then at the end of that train, you then take your disinfectant out of it and then you use it for irrigation. And probably one of the things you're hearing about more and more is that in California, they're looking at going to potable reuse or direct potable reuse or indirect potable reuse, where they're, in some cases, they're starting to do it more in Southern California, where they're taking water that comes out of a tertiary treated recycled water plant or a scalping plant, injecting it into an aquifer at one point underground, and then pulling it out miles downstream, and then bringing it into a water treatment facility, and then using it for drinking water.
Then the final effluent would then go to Bayshore Sanitary Sewer District, because they're like supposed to be the service provider out there, right?
So that's an interesting question. If the property owner elects to keep the property within Bayshore Sanitary District, then any waste discharge that would come from the scalping plant would be sent to Bayshore Sanitary District for final transmittal down to the San Francisco sewage treatment plant. But the potable, of course, would be used by us within the project area.
Okay. So we have currently on our system here, between Northeast Ridge and Central Brisbane, we got a 8-inch force main and a 14-inch. Is that?
16, I believe. It's a 16 one as it drops over at Guadalupe.
Okay. And those, is there plans to tie those in there, or is that predicated upon who the service provider for the sewage effluent's going to be?
Tie them into what, sir? I'm sorry.
To a scalping plant, to reclaim whatever water we can out of central Brisbane.
It depends, and like so many of the things that the conversations we have here, it depends upon the final project that's approved. Because if you've got a project that generates enough wastewater on its own and that has enough development on its own that we can mass balance out the irrigation water on that site, that's lovely, then we don't tie it in. But if we end up with a project that doesn't generate enough wastewater to be turned into irrigation water, but we have enough developed land that needs irrigation, we could take sewage from the Valley Drive lift station and connect it to the scalping plant.
Okay.
Before we go on to sewage and public services, I want to make sure we finish up the water supply.
Well, this
I know it's related, but if we
this
could
is
just stick on
related to the water supply because
Okay.
it's reclaimed water.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going into other
I had a
services.
follow-up question about the water tank. So if a new water tank would have to be built at a higher elevation, who would pay for that?
The developer.
Okay. Okay.
But we don't have the site, the actual site identified yet, right? I mean,
We have an elevation identified.
Okay, and what is that? You know,
I don't know. I don't recall off the top of my head now.
you get back to us on it.
So, as a follow-up to that, on page 281, I believe it is, it says that we have a project identified for a water tank, but we don't have a cost or a location. So we really don't have the property in place.
No, that's correct. We do not have the property, you're right.
Or the actual location, just a hopeful project that we know we need it to be at a certain elevation.
That's exactly
And
right.
so one would assume if it's above Guadalupe, it would be in the HPC area.
It possibly could be, yes. I think it most likely is in the HCP area somewhere. You're probably right.
And what kind of issues would that bring with it? Would it cause additional siting issues to be in the HCP?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think it's part of the master plan for that right now, so there'd be some challenges there, sure.
And did we identify in our master plan a rudimentary cost at all?
You mean our water sewer master plan?
Right.
So the tank alone, general rule of thumb for a tank in today's world is $2 a gallon. So if it's a 1.1 million gallon tank, it's $2.2 million just for the tank.
And is that for the physical tank or for the siting of the tank?
That's just for the tank.
Okay, and that wouldn't include the piping and the
It would not include the
necessary-
12-inch line to it. It would not include acquisition. No, it would not include design. No.
Okay.
You're correct.
So it's a much bigger project than that. And then once a tank were to be installed to service the Baylands, that would be incorporated into the entire Brisbane sewer cost structure rates because it'd be part of the service area for central Brisbane, the Sierra Point, and the Baylands.
So you're referring to the operations and maintenance of it, the long-term O&M of it?
Yeah.
Yes, I imagine it would be unless we were going to create a separate water district and sewer district out there.
And then to follow up on that same question about a separate water and sewer district, earlier your comment was that if the Baylands developer elects to stay in the Bayshore Sanitary District, does that mean they could create their own, or aren't they already physically in that district and would they have to apply to remove themselves from the district, or how would that work?
So the Baylands, for ease of understanding, just say from Lagoon Way North, including the Corporation Yard, is in the Bayshore Sanitary District sphere right now. It's within their boundaries. It's my understanding the developer, if they chose to, could choose to be annexed to an adjoining district. The most likely adjoining sewer district would be the city of Brisbane. That's going to be at their option.
So they would have to request it, and would that need to go through higher up?
LAFCO, I'm going to turn over and look at Allison. Am I right there, Allison?
Yeah, that would be a LAFCO approval, so it would have to go to the County Local Agency Formation Commission. Any boundary change would go through that commission.
And Bayshore could want that or not want that, depending on how it affected them financially.
I'm not going to presume for Bayshore Sanitary, ma'am.
But, I mean, they could either way.
Yes, you're right. They
not want
could either
Oppose it
approve
or
or
not oppose.
oppose or not oppose it. You're right.
And have we heard from them how they feel about in the comments on the EIR?
I think there was a comment letter from Bayshore. There were some minor issues, and we have not heard back subsequent to the final EIR.
Right now, the project does not include de-annexation from Bayshore Sanitary. That was not part of the project that the EIR analyzed. So, how that would happen wasn't really analyzed in the EIR. It wasn't part of the proposal at this point.
So they haven't weighed in on whether they would be opposed or in favor of annexation, or and how much of the base or sanitary district is the percentage of the Baylands? Do you know of their service district?
I'm only slightly familiar with their boundaries. Land-wise, it's probably a somewhat significant portion. Service-wise, it's probably not very much because there's not very many uses out there right now in the Baylands.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question to that.
Okay.
And then I don't think I have anywhere. I'll let you guys get to it. So it sounds like you just said there are challenges with the site that you're thinking, and you have the elevation, but it's obviously not all worked out. Do you have a plan B if that location is not going to work?
We did look at a plan B. We did study another site. It was less favorable, but
okay,
we did.
Just finish. Okay, just to wrap it up. So really, the water tank really comes down to project specific, right? That's what would be tied into that. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to follow up on the water recycling part that Clark had brought up. So it's all about scale. I mean, I guess it depends on how robust of a facility you can build based upon the demand. Is there any analysis in regards to incorporating the current sewage coming from Brisbane into the potentially new recycling water plant and providing that additional supply that then eventually could go into the Baylands?
That was not part of the EIR analysis. The EIR analyzed the 4 development scenarios, each one of which would generate sufficient sewage. So there was not an analysis as to connecting the rest of the city. The issue was with any of those 4 scenarios, there was sufficient demand for irrigation so that they're sending the rest of the city's sewage to a water recycling plant. There wouldn't be use for the recycled water unless you tried pumping it back uphill, which would really make it infeasible.
Yeah, going to the California cities conferences and going to the expos, I like walking the floor and seeing what the new companies are doing out there, and there's just some amazing things that they're doing with smaller facilities, and being able to not only recycle the water but then to take the solids and turning that into energy. I know that wasn't part of the study. It was in the sustainability framework. How do we go about being able to analyze the feasibility of something like that?
I'll give you an example down south of something similar. City of Norco, 30,000 people and 40-something thousand horses, has a manure problem. And they actually commissioned with General Electric for a feasibility study of a waste-to-energy plant. So you would do that by commissioning a specific study from somebody who could analyze that kind of plant.
Sure. Just kind of thinking more outside the box, you have Recology bringing in lots of organic waste, and you have other organic waste, and I know that we're confined to studying the environmental impacts from the plants that are before us, but what part in the process do we start to look at these other technologies that are emerging and being able to incorporate them into sustainable practices that eventually could help with the planning of the site?
Again, I think you hear a recurring theme this evening, and the idea of sort of there's hierarchy of sort of planning decisions and then levels of engineering and design that go with that. So again, once the city lands on a land use program as to the scale of the development, that helps with the idea of kind of some of these design parameters, understanding volumes and quantities of material there are to work with. And then that may lend itself to certain kind of technologies that make sense at a certain scale. And then you get into so once you have the land use program as part of the general plan, if you then also incorporate other aspirational goals as to how you want to treat some of these issues in terms of wastewater management or recycling or waste energy, whatever it is, you embed those into as policies in the general plan. So then a subsequent development, a subsequent specific plan, then they have the direction to do those studies based, again, on the scale and intensity and mix of land uses that the city's envisioning for that property.
No, that makes sense. All right, so that's the moment, when you're starting to update the general plan and you're putting out those goals, embedding them in the general plan, then the specific plan has to abide by those. Got it. In the staff report, it talks about the 50-year term and then an additional 25 years. I know that was an issue for the Planning Commission. We hope that the project goes longer than 75 years. I guess these agreements, they don't go usually longer than 50 and 25-year extension. That's why it's set up that way.
In all the development projects I've ever been involved in, I've never seen a water district agree to a transfer agreement or any kind of water supply in perpetuity. It's just, their typical planning is in 20-year periods, and 50-year term with 25-year extensions is about as good an agreement as any district's going to sign.
Just as a note of reference for you, sir, our water supply agreement with SFPUC has had 25-year terms.
There's mention of water audits. We want to make sure that we're, have the most robust, water policy possible. Who conducts the water audits, and then, how is that reported back to the city?
I think you're referring to some of the provisions of the sustainability framework of...
Well, it talks about, water audits for commercial users, water audits for hotels and motels.
You can set them up in a lot of different ways, but generally it would be if the city is imposing the requirement as the water agency, you would do the checking.
Okay. All right. All right, I'm good for now.
Okay. Terry, did you have any further questions on water? Water supply?
Yeah, the Planning Commission was in a little bit different order, so my questions are just in a little bit of different order. I don't think I have any questions right now on the water.
Great. All right.
I have one to follow up on Cliff's.
Okay. Well, I had some questions as well.
Okay.
Or you had some you should follow up, you're saying?
I just, based on the question he
go ahead.
said. So there are 25-year terms that are negotiated. Has there ever been an instance in which, when it's time to renegotiate, there's no water that's provided, or is it maybe just more of a ration? Like, I've never negotiated one of these before, so I don't know how this works, but do they ever come to negotiating time and it's like, well, we don't have any water for you, especially in time of a drought, or is it just we can't supply you with the same amount that you've had in the past?
I'm not familiar with that happening with potable water supplies for municipalities, but I've seen it happen with agricultural districts.
I see. Okay.
So as a follow-up to that, I had also had a question about what happens if there's a drought. Has the OID ever experienced a drought that has affected any of their water transfer agreements, to your knowledge?
No, no.
I can't answer that intelligently.
And does the term sheet or an agreement that we would enter into, would it provide for what would happen if there were to be a drought? I mean, just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it wouldn't happen. We've seen that recently. So what would happen if they weren't able to supply the water? What remedies would we have? How would we get the water?
At present, the term sheet doesn't have a water shortage contingency plan in it.
Okay. Okay, and then, so the source of the water, can you talk about that? Because my understanding is that it's not like we're getting the actual water from the OID. It's going, through this water wheeling. So it goes through OID to MID to SFPUC and then comes to Brisbane. So would the same water supply that goes to the Baylands be the same? Would it be the same water supply that's currently supplied to the rest?
Exactly the same.
Through Hetch Hetchy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I had a question about the finding of no impacts. On page 293 in the EIR, it talks about how the study found that there would be no impact on the resources from diversions from the Stanislaus River, because historically there have been other transfers, so this would be, an additional transfer. So my question is, how is that possible that there would be no additional impact when there's additional water transfer happening? I mean, is it assuming that the existing transfers, one of them would, come out and ours would be substituted for that? How does that work, that there would be no impact?
Historically, Oakdale Irrigation District has taken 41,000 acre-feet of water out of the Stanislaus River to a series of customers. That water is now available to other customers. And so essentially what the term sheet calls for would be purchase of some of that 41,000 acre-feet that had traditionally been taken out of the river. So it's not 2,400 acre-feet in addition to 41,000.
Okay. Let's see. And the staff report, or the EIR, talks about CEQA analysis that would be conducted, a subsequent CEQA analysis. What would be the timing of that in relations to the Baylands processing, the planning process?
The assumption there is that, one, there's a project that the applicant wants to pursue following your hearings. And that would be driven by two factors. One, the city's desire and need for 400 acre-feet, and the applicant's desire to move forward with whatever water they would need for that project. And that could occur at any time following your action on the Baylands. The complexity of moving that water is dependent on how much water is being moved. So I can't tell you how long it will take to actually design an operational regimen to move the water.
Would that come before or after approval of specific plans?
The recommendation in front of you is that operational issue come before approval of a specific plan.
Okay.
And we've talked about some of the reasons, how that water physically gets moved, how much at a time, where is it stored, in whose system, and how. And the EIR concluded, as well as in the Commission's recommendation, that all that should be known prior to approval of a specific plan.
Okay. And then one more question about the Recology project. So the EIR says that that's currently served by the SFPUC, and it's not part of the Brisbane Water District. So would that continue in place, or would the Brisbane Water District include if Recology expands, not the existing Recology site, but the expansion that would occur onto Brisbane property?
We haven't negotiated that
Okay.
yet, but I would imagine, and I'm looking forward on this, that just like many of the other large developments, because we're close to or approaching the maximum guarantee that we already have, we would require that expansion to bring its own water with them.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, so.
I do have one
sure.
other question. So, okay, so the Baylands site, is requiring the 2,000 acre AFY. And that's, you know, all the different development scenarios, that amount covers them, whether it's you're doing the recycle water or not. So if we do the recycling water facility, we're definitely going to have more supply to use for, say, irrigation. The city has this agreement with the water district. It only pays for the water that it uses. It isn't you pay one amount and you for the whole entire allotment. You just pay for what you need, but you're guaranteed getting the 2,400, the 400 for us, and the 2,000 for the Baylands, correct?
I think that's part of the negotiations of an actual agreement. I've seen some agreements, water transfer agreements, where the end user had to guarantee purchase of the entire supply from year one. Others, it was ramped up, so it's a deal point as part of the negotiation.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Generally, though, if you have up to 2,000 acre feet, the agency selling the water wants to know that they're actually going to sell 2,000, as opposed to, yeah, we'll hold 2,000 acre feet for you, but you don't have to actually buy any. That's usually not a good deal for the seller.
Sure. So yeah, you're right. We do need to hone in on the intensity of the development, and then that will determine, of course, you know, what we negotiate our demands.
Okay. So let's move on then to consideration of public services and facilities. So in looking at the report, that includes police, fire, schools, libraries, water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, stormwater drainage, solid waste collection. Who would like to start with questions? Madison?
I have a brief services question. On page 279, it indicates that that there were 3,100 calls to the police department in 2010. If you look at 2016, was that about the same amount of calls? Too, I'm just trying to figure out, like, year to year, if it's increased or stayed relatively the same. Okay. It's my only services question.
I have one
Sure.
brief question.
Okay.
Can you explain on page 279, you talk about 24/7 shifts and beat shifts, and I'd like a explanation of that, because it's not clear in the paperwork we have what the difference is between a 24/7 shift and a beat shift. And then it also states that under one of the plans that it would require additional officers but no equipment, and I don't understand how we would have officers and no equipment.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that last part. My response to the IR, it indicated there'd be an additional need for patrol vehicles. One thing that wasn't mentioned in there was increase in dispatch services as well. But back to your original question regarding staffing. So in regular business, you need to add one person, you add one person. But we operate 24/7, 365 days a year. So we have we have 4 shifts then. We have 2 teams, 1 day shift, 1 night shift, 4 days a week, and then the other 4 days is another day shift and night shift. So to add 1 patrol person 24/7, taking into account that at least 1 person's going to be on vacation, sick, court, or something of that nature, it would require hiring 5 bodies to staff 1 person 24/7, 365.
Ah, I see.
And then what is the beat? What do they mean by a beat shift?
I don't know that term. I didn't use that term in my writings.
I think the question had come up, and from some of the original discussions about having 2 different patrol beats as opposed to 1 patrol beat.
Yeah, well, I could see that. It could be very easily more than 2 beats if we were to go to a beat system. Currently, on paper, there was when I started beat system, but just to the nature of our staffing, only having 2 minimum staffing, and the layout and size of the area that we have to cover, we essentially handle the entire town right now as 1 beat. But once the Baylands develops, it very would likely split it up to a minimum of 2 beats, if not 3.
Okay, so a beat is an area.
A beat is an area, that's correct.
Okay, so it's a service area.
Yes.
So when it says it would require establishment of a second beat and 2 additional 24/7 shifts, it's meaning a separate area and 10 officers.
That could be one scenario, that's correct.
Okay, I wasn't clear on.
No, it's confusing the way it's stated, but.
Because further on it keeps referring back to beats and not beats, and I wasn't, when they said a beat officer, I didn't know what that meant.
Like neighborhood.
Feet on the ground. That's where the term came from, wasn't it? Like in New York?
Could be.
Is that it, Terry?
Um,
Because I have something to follow up on.
I'll let you follow up on that. That was just a clarification I wanted to get for.
Bob, I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand the new math here, so bear with me, okay? Because in the staff report, when we're talking about new officers, so we have 4 shifts, right? And so that's 1 officer per shift is 4, right?
That's right.
And then how many backups? You said 1?
I think realistically, you would have to have a 5th body to ensure that you're staffing all 4 of those shifts, 24/7, 365.
Okay. So when I look at the, there's a developer scenario, there's a community plan scenario, and then there's the Energy Renewable and Planning Commission recommendation scenario. So on the community plan, it says need a total of 8 new officers. It's 1 officer required 24/7, so that would be 4, and 3 support officers. What is that?
So the 5 that we're talking about initially that we just covered, that's kind of a baseline increase for the Baylands project, regardless of the scope. That's kind of the starting point, just based on the amount of area we'd have to cover and no matter what you put out there.
Sure.
So some of these other scenarios would, depending on the scope, would add additional officers. And originally, when I did the analysis, I had the community preferred plan, the developer plan, and those are the only 2 plans that I did analysis on.
Mm-hmm.
So the community preferred plan would be having an additional officer on day shift to cover the increase. So you would have to have another officer on the 2 day shifts.
Okay.
So that would be at the 7, and then
Similar
again,
to like a desk sergeant, basically, right?
no, there'd be another beat officer because our day increase in calls are much higher during the day.
Okay, so that would be 4, then plus 2 is 6, right? And then the extra rotating or potential rotating officer is 7.
It would be 5 plus 3, which is 8, and then so that would bring 4 officers during the day shift and 3 at night shift for minimum staffing, with 1 officer to fill the spots when people are sick or off or whatnot.
Okay, all right.
And then the developer preferred plan that I did analysis on, was essentially doubling the baseline because of the increase to both day shift and night.
Yeah, it says 2 officers per shift, and then 10 officers total. So that's, I guess, on the developer one, wouldn't that be even more? I mean, because if you got 2 per shift, that's 8, plus one, or what, right? Be 9, 10. Then, is there extra there?
Well, how I laid it out, it was adding one officer 24/7 require hiring 5 officers in addition to the baseline 5 for a total of 10. To ensure that we have a minimum of 4 officers on duty 24/7. So that's day shift and night shift. And it would also require at least, that would include additional vehicles and supplies to go along with that.
And also, potential site, depending on what's approved, right?
Right, we have recommendations for a substation out there as well.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. That's all I have for police.
I have a follow-up question to that. So this looked at the physical impact and whether we would need to provide additional facilities for the increased staffing, but it didn't look at the economic impact on the city. And my understanding is that's being studied separately by Kaiser Marston. So are we going to be looking at that later on in this EIR review, and if so, when?
You'll have another meeting on fiscal impacts of development.
Okay.
And that will be addressed as part of that.
Okay, great. Okay. Madison, any questions? Cliff, did you ask your question?
No, I didn't. First of all, I just want to make a comment. Congratulations on that 95% 3-minute emergency response average. That's impressive. So in regards to the storefront substation, so I know we're going to be talking about those financial impacts. But I'm just going to ask the question anyways. Is that something that you put into a development agreement, or is that something that the developer is required to do based upon the analysis that comes out of the EIR?
I believe it would show up as a mitigation measure, at least based on what was analyzed. It would be a mitigation measure it would be a requirement of the developer.
Okay. So there's not only the substation, but the hiring of the officers and then all the equipment, and that could all be negotiated between the city and the developer in regards to how those things are funded in the future.
The way that it's set up right now is there's a requirement that would come out of the Commission's recommendations that be put into the general plan for preparation by the developer of police and fire service plans that would look at what is the land use approved at a general plan level, how do we meet for the police department staffing needs, the physical needs for the substation. That would also get into the location of the substation in relation to fire, what kind of facilities are necessary to meet their response times. And then the fiscal impact, the money going back and forth, would be part of your review of the project and a discussion to have in a development agreement. One of the things that I've seen with some projects is actually a statement on the part of the city that this project must generate such and such ratio
Absolutely.
of income to cost, and that we, in some cities we aren't going to accept. Yes, when it's all built out, it makes a profit, but we're not about to subsidize it. So that's part of the negotiation, typically in a development agreement or in the approval of a specific plan itself.
All right, thank you.
So to follow up on that 3-minute emergency response average, how does that compare to other communities? I know we're small, so we can get the police out there pretty quickly. And is there a statewide minimum that we're trying to meet?
There's
or some standard?
we set our own standards, and
Okay.
we set them pretty high, but the chief was able to contact some of the surrounding agencies to just do a little bit of comparison. And I think we do surprisingly well given how spread out we are compared to the amount of area other cities are trying to get calls to. We get, on average, to our priority one. Again, a little bit of this is apples and oranges because everybody quantifies their types of calls a little differently. But about 4 minutes on our priority one, and about 4 minutes on priority 2, and about 5 3/4 on priority 3. And you compare that to, say, Daly City, they're closer to 5 minutes on their priority 1, a little over 6 on priority 2, and a little over 8 on their priority 3. So we're doing really well there. Daily or South San Francisco is similar. They're just under 4 on the priority 1. 5 minutes 20 seconds, close to 5.5 on priority 2, and almost 7 minutes on their priority 3. Now, where you see a big difference is Colma, and again, their area they're responding within is a very condensed area, and their priority 1 there is 2.5 minutes, and then about 4 minutes and a little over 4 going down the line. So I think comparing to the other agencies in the area, I think we're doing quite well.
Okay, you can probably cross through all of Colma in less than 3 minutes. So.
Can I follow up on that, Lori?
Yes,
real quick?
go ahead.
Just so I understand, how do you calculate that? Like, is something? How do you register when you are when you're with the person who called? Like, how are you keeping track of the time that it takes?
That's all done in the computer-aided dispatch system, in the records management system. When someone calls into dispatch, it's automatically logged in the time. So everything's recorded. Dispatcher takes the information. When they dispatch the call, it's also logged. Everything that happens during a call is logged minute by minute.
So when you arrive, it's something that happens.
As the officer gets on the radio and says, "I've arrived on scene,"
Okay.
it sets another mark in the clock. You know, it used to all be done on punch cards. Nowadays, it's all done in computers, so we can get a printout of everything that happened minute by minute on a call.
Okay, great, thanks.
I have a question about the fire facilities. So on page 285, it states that there's a fire protection services plan that has a performance standard that all Baylands development must be located within 1.5 miles of a fully staffed fire station. So our current station, luckily, is kind of on Bay Shore, heading towards the Baylands. How far, north, what's the mileage in terms of, would we have to definitely put a fire station in the Baylands? It's more than 1.5 miles away, I'm assuming, to get through the Baylands. What's your projection for how many fire stations we would need?
So I think what we tried to just say, once we have a specific, know what the
Okay.
plan's going to be, we'd go out and put it to the standards and the goals that we've set there, and then we could make a determination on what the needs might be.
Okay.
A lot of it has to do, residential, commercial, has 2 different kinds of issues to it.
Right.
But that's what we'd apply when we got out there to take a look. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a fire station. It just kind of depends on the final project out there.
Okay, I have a question on schools. Nobody else has asked on that yet? Or are we still working on fire and police?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
that's what
We're working on all those services I mentioned in the beginning, so schools are included. But if you have others on fire and police, then we can.
No, my fire question was the one that you had asked, so,
Okay.
yeah, and that makes sense.
Anything else?
So Ron, you did say potentially another station could be needed or not. Definitely personnel, probably at least minimum of 1 per station between 81 and 93.
Years ago, when we talked about this, not knowing exactly what was going to occur, we basically threw out the idea that there could be a fire station needed and an additional fire company staffing that. There's a lot of different ways you could approach getting its speed and weight to an incident. So I think really once we know what the project looks like, then we'd have a better idea of how we accomplish getting the weight, meaning the number of people there, and how quickly we can arrive there, measuring Station 93, Station 81, and then make that determination on what we may need. I mean, you could add staffing to existing companies. You could include a new company. Residential versus commercial. Commercial might need a focus on a piece of equipment as opposed to something else. A ladder truck, let's say, as you go up, and from that particular standpoint. And you might be able to place that ladder truck in an existing fire station. So we just kind of have to take a look at it at the time. But definitely there's some flexibility in looking at what we'd need out there.
And most of our current calls are medical, right?
Yep.
And so it probably wouldn't be much different.
Probably not, and that's why I say residential, much more services needed from the fire perspective. Commercial, industrial, much less, depending on the size, depending on how big the population base is out there as part of, that project.
But this is all new commercial type structure, whether it be high
It'd
rise
all
or
be
whether all
pre-engineered,
sprinklered and
exactly.
everything
It'd
like
be all
that.
pre-engineered for fire protection systems and all that. So, yeah, that's the nice thing about a location like that.
Okay.
You have all brand-new stuff.
Thank you.
Any other questions on fire and police?
Nothing that I can't ask during our
Okay.
regular meeting.
All right. Then I'd like to move on to the library and schools portion of public services. Does anyone have questions on that?
2 questions, but I'm going to say for
Okay.
public hearing.
Clark?
Yeah, maybe, save the school ones for
Okay.
the general meeting.
All right. Well, then I'll ask my question. So, okay. So it says that the report says that the DSP and the DSPV scenarios would not require a new high school under CEQA. It's on page 285. But even if that's the case, can the city still require the developer to build a high school?
You can request it. Under state law, the school district has the sole authority to set requirements for schools. So you could, as part of your negotiation in a development agreement, request that, but you could not impose a requirement that would say you must build a high school for so many units. Under state law, as far as you can go outside of a development agreement is require them to pay the fees, and after that it's between the school district and the developer.
And then I have a question about the library. So at the time that EIR was being studied, we didn't even have the new library, really underway. And now that we have a plan and an architect on board, would that accommodate the developer's scenario? Or if not, would there be a mechanism to require or request that a new library be built at the Baylands, an additional library?
There's already a mitigation measure that requires a library be built
Right.
there. And the reason for that is the total population that would come out of the developer's plan is about 10,000.
Yeah.
And so 10,000 new residents was not anything that you were looking at in terms of the existing
Right.
library. You would have the option at that point, should that level of development be approved by your council, to say, we want a second library or we want one central library.
Does the library analysis still allot needs for a new library when there's commercial development as opposed to residential?
Yeah, commercial industrial development has nearly no library demand.
Okay,
It's very
so there's
minor.
no assumption that people during their lunchtime might go to the library. It's because it's based, I guess, on where you live, where you have your library card. So it's linked to the residential.
Yes, the type of library use that would be accrued to commercial uses would be off the peak hours. It would be somebody in the middle of the workday, which is not the peak usage.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
About the school,
Yes.
thank you, Lori. Just kind of as a point of reference, since this does fall under, the Baylands currently falls under Bayshore School District and Jefferson Union High School District. Bayshore right now is K through 8 at Robertson, because they tore down Bayshore, and they're rebuilding that school right now, which I think will be open in September, I believe September, and it will be K through 8. And they're only going to have one school site, and they're selling the Robinson site probably to housing developer or something. So just might want to
Okay.
update that in the final FEIR, so that way we're current.
That's true.
So do you think that means that they're going to have less capacity?
I don't know about less capacity. I mean, it's kind of, things go up and down, and as I understand, kind of like with the area, with our meeting Lori, you and I had with the Jefferson Union High School District last week, I believe it was, that their enrollment is falling specifically in Pacifica because the price of homes are going so far up that, families are moving out. And they're becoming, instead of 2.1, like 2.0. So you got a lot less kids. I guess that's the statement in here that enrollment is declining. And I'd say that probably trickles down into everywhere, but I'm just surmising here that, a lot of families are getting priced out who rent. Mm-hmm. And some families who own are selling out and moving to lower costing areas. So,
yeah.
But I don't know what the statistics are on that. So, but that is going on. What do you call that? Migration?
Out migration. And what school districts typically go through that are not having a lot of new development is there will be cycles of demographics. So you'll get, when an area is new, there's lots of kids. Schools are full, the population ages, the kids move out, and you'll see school enrollment drop. Mm-hmm. In a lot of places, new families move in, and some school districts have gotten caught because at the bottom of the demographic trend, they sold off school sites, then families start moving back into the neighborhood. And that's been a particular trend down south in LA County that's been really problematic for some districts that sold off schools when they didn't need them. And then families moved back in. They had no place to put the school and no fees to build them with.
I know. I remember back in the 60s and 70s that, a lot less homes in Brisbane, but a lot more kids. So our population's 1963 is pretty parallel to what it is today. But, when we had high school, went to one high school, we had actually 3 Greyhound buses at 3 different stops that picked up kids, Mm-hmm. And so now, we got one bus that, you have to have kids from Panorama come over to fill it. So it's interesting how that works.
Yeah. Okay, are there any additional questions? It looks like we're almost out of time, but we may have time.
I just wanted to make one comment on page 281 of the, under libraries. There's a contradictory statement in the second paragraph. Library impacts were determined to be substantially lower. Library impacts were determined to be significant for the DSPB, and less than significant for the DSPB. So they are both significant and less than significant. So one is correct.
It's significant in the developer-sponsored plan, less than significant in the community prepared plan.
So that should, the last one should be the CPP.
Yes.
CP.
Yeah. Good catch. Okay. All right. Well, if you haven't had a chance to ask your questions now, we will have the public hearing following a 15-minute break. So we'll adjourn. Thank you.